You won't believe how a harmless old beggar woman, known for her gentle demeanor, managed to orchestrate the most elaborate and chilling act of revenge against the man who stole everything from her, her own son. What started as a tragic tale of deceit spiraled into a calculated game of psychological warfare, leaving everyone involved questioning reality. Agnes, with her neatly tied scarf and the worn but clean coat she always wore, was a familiar sight on the corner of Elm and Maple. For years, she'd sat on that same overturned bucket, a cardboard sign beside her that simply read, "Lost my way. Any help appreciated." Her eyes, though clouded with age, held a persistent spark of dignity that set her apart from other panhandlers. Passers-by often offered more than spare change: a warm coffee, a sandwich, a kind word. Agnes accepted everything with a quiet nod and a soft, "God bless." She never begged, never pleaded, just sat, a silent sentinel of hardship. What most people didn't know was that Agnes wasn't entirely lost. She had a small, meticulously kept apartment above a defunct bakery a few blocks away, paid for in cash by a distant relative she rarely spoke of. The begging was an experiment, a way to observe, to understand the ebb and flow of human kindness and cruelty. And, more recently, it had become a calculated stage for a far more intricate drama. Her son, David, had always been a charmer. Even as a boy, he could talk his way out of anything, leaving a trail of broken promises and bewildered adults in his wake. Agnes, blinded by a mother's love, had always excused his youthful indiscretions, attributing them to an overactive imagination or a spirited nature. She'd worked tirelessly, cleaning houses and taking on sewing jobs, to put him through college, dreaming of a stable, successful future for him. David had graduated, indeed, with honors in business, but his ambition quickly veered into less reputable channels. He started a series of get-rich-quick schemes, each more audacious and less legitimate than the last. Agnes, always his steadfast supporter, poured her modest savings into his ventures, convinced that this time it would be different. Each time, it wasn't. The money vanished, and David would reappear, contrite and full of new, even more promising ideas. Agnes, despite the growing ache in her heart, always found a way to believe him. She wanted to believe him. He was all she had left. The final blow came 6 months before Agnes became the beggar. David, with his slick suits and even slicker words, convinced her to sell her childhood home, a small, 2-bedroom bungalow nestled in a quiet cul-de-sac, the last tangible piece of her husband's legacy. He promised her a substantial return, enough to secure her future and allow her to travel the world, something she'd always dreamed of. He presented her with complex-looking documents, filled with legal jargon she didn't fully comprehend, assuring her he'd handled all the details. She signed, her hand trembling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The house sold quickly. David took the proceeds, a tidy sum that represented Agnes's entire life's work, and disappeared. Not a trace. His phone was disconnected, his apartment cleared out. Agnes was left with nothing but the clothes on her back, a few cherished photos, and the bitter taste of betrayal. The distant relative, upon hearing her plight, arranged for the small apartment and a modest allowance, enough to keep her from truly starving, but not enough to live. It was in this crucible of despair that a new Agnes began to emerge. The gentle, trusting woman was slowly consumed by a quiet, simmering rage. The hurt was profound, but underneath it, a colder, harder resolve began to form. She understood then that David was beyond redemption, beyond explanation. He was a predator, and she his prey. But Agnes had always been a keen observer, a quiet strategist in her own way. She had seen how the world worked from her quiet corner, how people could be swayed, how appearances could be deceiving. And she began to weave a plan, as intricate and deliberate as the patterns she once sewed into delicate fabrics. Her transformation into the beggar was the first step. It was a disguise, a way to become invisible, to hear and see things without drawing suspicion. She chose her corner carefully, a busy intersection with a mix of regulars and fleeting strangers. She learned their routines, their habits, their vulnerabilities. She listened to their conversations, piecing together fragments of information like a master detective. She spent hours in the public library, not reading novels, but poring over old newspapers, legal records, and financial journals, teaching herself the intricacies of corporate structures, offshore accounts, and the shadowy world of white-collar crime. She learned about shell corporations, dummy accounts, and the art of money laundering. It was a crash course in the very mechanisms that David had used to defraud her, and she absorbed every detail with a grim determination. Her daily routine as the beggar became a cover for her true mission. While she sat there, seemingly lost in thought, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations and deductions. She watched for anyone who resembled David, anyone who moved with his particular swagger, his casual confidence. She learned to spot the signs of wealth, the subtle tells of illicit gains. She cataloged faces, mannerisms, snippets of phone calls overheard. The street became her intelligence network, and she, its unassuming spymaster. One rainy Tuesday, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, splashing a puddle near her bucket. A man emerged, impeccably dressed, his face partially obscured by an expensive umbrella. But Agnes knew that walk, that particular set of the shoulders. It was David. He was older, a bit heavier, but unmistakably him. He walked into the high-rise office building across the street, a place Agnes had noted before for its anonymous, glass-fronted facade. Her heart hammered, a mix of fear and a grim satisfaction. The chase, she realized, was truly on. She spent the next few weeks observing the building, charting David's movements, identifying his associates. She learned his hours, his favorite coffee shop, the pattern of his lunch breaks. She even managed to eavesdrop on a few of his phone calls, her hearing surprisingly acute. He was involved in some kind of investment scheme, a large-scale project that sounded suspiciously like his past ventures, but on a much grander scale. He was clearly prospering, living a life of luxury while his mother sat on a bucket, feigning destitution. The irony was not lost on her. It only fueled her resolve. Her investigations led her down unexpected paths. She discovered that David wasn't just a small-time con artist anymore. He had fallen in with a group of sophisticated criminals, men and women who operated on a global scale, moving vast sums of money through labyrinthine financial channels. They were involved in everything from shady real estate deals to elaborate cryptocurrency scams. David, it seemed, had found his true calling, albeit one on the wrong side of the law. Agnes knew she couldn't confront him directly. He was too cunning, too ruthless, and now too well protected. She needed a different approach, one that would dismantle his empire from within, without ever revealing her hand. She needed to become a ghost, a whisper in the system, a force he wouldn't see coming until it was too late. Her first move was subtle. She began to gather information about David's associates. Who were they? What were their weaknesses? She noticed a pattern. They were all ambitious, driven by greed, and fiercely protective of their own interests. They were also prone to infighting and distrust, a fertile ground for planting seeds of doubt. One of David's closest associates was a man named Marcus Thorne, a smooth-talking lawyer with a reputation for bending the rules. Agnes observed Thorne for weeks, noticing his extravagant spending habits, his frequent visits to exclusive casinos, and his not-so-secret mistress. She learned that Thorne was deep in debt, despite his outward display of wealth, constantly scrambling to cover his losses. He was a weak link, a potential crack in David's armor. Agnes devised a plan to exploit this weakness. She anonymously sent a series of carefully crafted, untraceable emails to Thorne's creditors, subtly hinting at his association with illicit financial dealings and questioning the true source of his income. The emails were vague enough to be deniable, but precise enough to plant a seed of suspicion. She also sent anonymous tips to Thorne's wife, containing photographic evidence of his affair. The goal wasn't to destroy Thorne, not yet, but to create chaos and distrust within David's inner circle. To make him vulnerable. The results were almost immediate. Thorne's life began to unravel. His wife filed for divorce, threatening to expose his financial improprieties in court. His creditors, now suspicious, started demanding immediate repayment. The pressure on Thorne mounted, and Agnes, from her vantage point on the street corner, watched with a quiet satisfaction as the cracks in his carefully constructed facade began to show. Thorne became increasingly erratic, snapping at subordinates and openly arguing with David. The harmonious criminal enterprise was beginning to fray. Next, Agnes turned her attention to David's primary legitimate front, a seemingly innocuous import-export company that, in reality, served as a conduit for laundering money. She meticulously researched the company's financials, scrutinizing every public record, every tax filing, every shipping manifest she could get her hands on. She even managed to obtain insider information through a disgruntled former employee she befriended under her beggar guise, a young man who had been unfairly dismissed by David. He was eager for revenge and unwittingly provided Agnes with critical details. Armed with this information, Agnes began to anonymously leak select pieces of incriminating evidence to regulatory agencies and financial watchdogs. She didn't dump everything at once. Instead, she released a slow, steady drip of information, each leak designed to raise more questions than answers, to create a cloud of suspicion around the company. She highlighted inconsistencies in their shipping logs, discrepancies in their declared assets, and questionable transactions with offshore entities. The goal was not to trigger an immediate raid, but to initiate a prolonged, exhaustive investigation, tying up David's resources and putting his legitimate business operations under intense scrutiny. She wanted to choke off his financial lifeline, slowly but surely. The investigations began. First, an internal audit. Then, discreet inquiries from government agencies. David, oblivious to the source of his troubles, grew increasingly agitated. He suspected rivals, disgruntled employees, even other members of his own crew. The seeds of paranoia Agnes had sown were bearing fruit. He started to distrust everyone around him, questioning loyalties and creating an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. This internal strife further weakened his organization, making it easier for Agnes to continue her work. But Agnes knew that simply dismantling David's operation wouldn't be enough. She wanted him to understand, truly understand, the depth of his betrayal. She wanted him to feel the same helplessness, the same crushing loss she had experienced. She wanted him to know it was her. But how could an old beggar woman achieve such a personal, devastating blow without revealing herself? Her plan required a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. She began to leave subtle, almost imperceptible clues at the scenes of her information drops. A small, carefully folded origami bird, a craft she had taught David as a child. A specific brand of cheap, lavender-scented soap, the same kind she had always used. A single, pressed lily, her favorite flower, left where only David would find it. These were not direct accusations, but rather whispers from the past, designed to burrow into his subconscious, to make him question his sanity, to make him wonder if ghosts from his past were returning to haunt him. The clues were intermittent, never obvious, always just out of reach of definite identification. David, a man who believed only in logic and money, initially dismissed them as random coincidences or the work of a bizarre prankster. But as the financial pressure mounted, as his associates turned on each other, as his carefully constructed world began to crumble, the subtle reminders began to gnaw at him. He started seeing her face in crowds, hearing her voice in the murmur of the street, a phantom limb ache of guilt he had long suppressed. One day, Agnes noticed a new addition to David's daily routine. He started visiting a particular park bench in a quiet corner of the city, sitting alone, staring into space. He looked troubled, his usual swagger replaced by a haunted, distant gaze. She observed him from a distance, hidden behind a newspaper, her heart a mixture of sorrow and grim satisfaction. He was beginning to break. The psychological warfare was taking its toll. It was then that Agnes decided to deliver the final, devastating blow. She knew David had a safe deposit box, a secret repository for his most valuable and often illicit assets. She had learned its location from a casual conversation overheard between him and Thorne, a conversation Thorne now regretted having. Thorne, in his panic and anger, had inadvertently revealed key details about David's hidden wealth. Agnes had a plan to access it, not through brute force or theft, but through a clever manipulation of the legal system. She compiled all the information she had gathered on David's illicit activities, a meticulously organized dossier of his crimes. She included evidence of his money laundering, his involvement in various scams, and even details of the fraud he committed against her, specifically referencing the sale of her home. But she didn't send it to the authorities. Not yet. Instead, she created a fictional identity, a seemingly distraught investor who claimed to have been defrauded by David in a separate, equally elaborate scheme. She used a burner phone and a voice modulator to contact David's lawyer, a respectable but gullible man named Mr. Henderson, known for his adherence to proper legal procedure. She painted a vivid picture of financial ruin and emotional distress, convincing Henderson that David was a dangerous criminal. She then presented fabricated evidence, just enough to be convincing, not enough to be traced back to her. Her goal was to initiate a civil lawsuit against David, a lawsuit that would ultimately lead to a court order freezing his assets, including the contents of his safe deposit box. She knew it would be a lengthy process, but she had patience. And she knew that once the legal machinery began to turn, David would be trapped. The lawsuit was filed, and David, already reeling from the regulatory investigations and internal strife, found himself facing yet another legal battle. He was forced to defend himself, to spend vast sums on legal fees, to explain the source of his wealth to a skeptical judge. The pressure was immense, and his usual charm and cunning were failing him. He was a cornered animal, lashing out at everyone, but unable to escape the trap Agnes had set. The court ordered the safe deposit box to be opened, its contents inventoried as part of the legal proceedings. Agnes arranged to be present, disguised as a distant, concerned relative of the fictional plaintiff. She watched, her heart pounding, as the bank manager opened the heavy steel door. Inside, nestled amongst stacks of cash, illicit diamonds, and forged documents, was a small, tarnished silver locket. It was her locket, a gift from her husband, stolen by David years ago. And beside it, a single, pressed lily, her favorite flower, now withered and brown. The same lily she had been leaving as a clue. David's eyes widened as he saw the locket, then the lily. His gaze darted to Agnes, standing quietly in the corner, still in her beggar attire, her eyes meeting his. In that moment, he knew. He finally understood. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The investigations, the lawsuits, the crumbling empire, the subtle clues, it all converged into a single, horrifying truth. His mother, the gentle, trusting woman he had so callously discarded, had orchestrated his downfall. The shock on his face was profound, a mixture of disbelief, fear, and a dawning horror. Agnes offered no smile, no triumphant gaze. Only a quiet, unwavering stare that conveyed the full weight of her suffering and her relentless pursuit of justice. She had given him a taste of his own medicine, stripped him bare, just as he had stripped her bare. The civil lawsuit exposed David's criminal activities to the authorities, who were already investigating his import-export company. He was arrested shortly after, his empire in ruins, his reputation shattered. The safe deposit box contents were seized, much of it returned to various defrauded victims, including Agnes, who quietly reclaimed her locket and a portion of the money from the sale of her home. Agnes, no longer a beggar, returned to her small apartment. She didn't seek public recognition, nor did she gloat over David's downfall. Her revenge was a private victory, a restoration of her dignity, a testament to the quiet strength of a woman scorned. The story, however, doesn't end there. Years later, David, now a shadow of his former self, was released from prison. He was broken, utterly destitute, and friendless. He wandered the streets, a ghost of his former self, until he found himself on a familiar corner, elm and maple. There, sitting on the same overturned bucket, was an old woman. Her hair was whiter, her face more lined, but her eyes still held that persistent spark of dignity. It was Agnes. He approached her, his voice hoarse, filled with a mixture of shame and disbelief. "Mother," he whispered. Agnes looked up, her gaze steady, unreadable. "David," she said, her voice soft, devoid of anger or triumph. "Lost your way, have you?" She reached into a worn canvas bag beside her and pulled out a clean, folded cardboard sign. She handed it to him. On it, in neat, deliberate handwriting, were the words, "Lost my way. Any help appreciated." David stared at the sign, then at his mother, a profound understanding dawning in his eyes. Was this her final act of revenge, to make him experience the very destitution he had inflicted upon her? Or was it something else, something more complex, an offer of a different kind of redemption? Agnes simply gestured to the empty space beside her on the pavement. "There's room for two," she said. The setting sun cast long shadows over elm and maple, leaving the ultimate meaning of this reunion and Agnes's final intentions shrouded in an unsettling, open mystery.
Your watch to the end. Be click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.